Today, we're going to speak with Emily Schaad. She's a resident of Asheville. She's one of our principal violists with the Rock Hill Symphony and an old friend from New York. Hello, Emily.
Hi, David.
I've known you for a long time in various roles, and first as a string teacher in New York, and then as a fiddler, and then as a conductor. Very different roles. But I never really knew a lot about your educational background. So why don't you fill us in and tell us about that?
Sure. So I did a whirlwind tour of colleges for my undergrad studies. My mother used to say I was majoring in orientation, and I started out at the Hart School at University of Hartford, and as a violinist with some viola included. And for the second semester of my freshman year, I went to Mannes College, where I studied with Karen Richer, who had been my mentor in high school. And then I spent 2 years at Juilliard with Karen Tuttle, and then transferred to Curtis for 2 more years, also with Tuttle.
And so when a person is looking at the difference between Juilliard and Curtis, like what prompted you to transfer?
Um, it's funny. I felt like I never really found my place there. It's a really if I mean by standards, like if you compare it against a university, it's not a big school. It felt big to me, and I felt very, I guess I felt kind of invisible there.
I mean, at
Um,
Juilliard. Yeah.
yeah, and I I think that the biggest thing for me was I really wanted to find my people to play chamber music with,
Mm.
and I never really fell in with a group of people to really work hard at chamber music at Juilliard. And I felt people were either already kind of in groups, or they didn't want to really put a lot of time into it. Actually, I didn't know very many people who were putting a lot of time into chamber music in undergrad. Um, and so I just thought I might have better luck. I thought I might have a little bit of a different experience. Um, and I think it was just kind of about what the feel of it was like for me. And I think, like in retrospect, I probably would have had a stronger experience in that way if I had gone in as a freshman.
Mm.
But um, but that's what happened. So I guess I got a
Right,
sort
right.
of a
I mean,
quilt, tapestry of an experience
yeah, that
in
makes sense
with it.
about the chamber music because it's so strong at Curtis. It's such a focused place. I went to school in Philadelphia as well, and then I had friends there and knew about it. And I mean, it's the different for people who aren't musicians. I guess it's the difference between Yale and Harvard kind of thing. I mean, both of them are quite
Yeah.
high level, right? And but tell us about the time at Curtis. I mean, what makes that a special school?
Well, yeah, it's also it's a place where I think there's of course two sides to every coin, but there's also, like, you feel an incredible privilege to be there, and to be you know one of the people that gets to take advantage of just a really bizarrely specialized environment.
I mean, at
And
that time, it was probably all paid for, right?
yes.
Yeah, everyone full scholarship. Yeah,
Hmm. Yep. And yeah, so there's that. I mean, that's just sort of has a feeling to it, and also just like kind of this history of, the faculty was, a lot of the faculty was, shall we say, not young when I was there. And it was, a lot of us were studying with a generation of people who had touched another time, kind of.
yeah.
And you combine that with the idea that Curtis is so steeped in this, like, deep tradition, and sort of this, it's like it's close, and it's also, sort of weird in the same way that a family can be,
hmm
where there's a definite, there's cultures, and you're raised in a culture, and you can sort of like blend with it and not at different times and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
I mean, for people who don't know more about the place, it was a big old mansion right on Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, and founded in the 20s when money was just plentiful. And It's about the size of an orchestra, I guess. Student bodies and pianists, singers, and
Yep. Yeah. So I would say, the size of a, pretty expanded orchestra plus the opera singers and the pianists, organists, conductors, composers, things like
right,
that. So maybe
right.
I'd say it's about the size of two orchestras,
Hmm.
when it's all said and done.
When it's all there, yeah, and the
Between
faculty, some of
studio.
them, I know some of them, like the Curtis Quartet was one of the earlier students at Curtis. They were students in the 20s, and they were still teaching then. I Orlando Cole taught until he was like in his late 90s or early hundreds or something, right? I mean, they just never stopped. And but
Yeah.
they had that old tradition, passing it on. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I felt really lucky to spend time with Karen Tuttle, who is a really really important voice in the string playing world. She kind of brought this at a time where it wasn't popular at all. Brought this idea that that playing a really uncomfortable instrument doesn't have to hurt,
Hmm.
and also really foundational ideas about how to combine the physical motions it takes to play the instrument with the musical phrasing and the musical ideas that you're trying to get
I
across.
remember
um,
hearing about her that she was a maverick in that way, where people were
You're
playing
the
and
maverick in a lot of ways.
well, they were injuring themselves. They still are. We have this weird idea that music should be difficult or should feel like it's hard work, and it's supposed to be pleasurable, but so many people are in pain. And
Right, and that combined with the fact that she was a trailblazer as a woman,
so, yeah.
and I mean, a woman as a performer at all at that time was just more unusual, and also, taking a woman's body to a large instrument and combining that with her ideas of not having to try to talk and figure out ways to reduce pain and strain on your body, and then also just the musicians that she was close to, and whose ideas we shared together. She was really close with Tabato, who was
Hmm.
just as you know, a phenomenal oboe player who just moved her in a musical way, and she based a lot of her musical phrasing
Uh-huh.
ideas on her relationship with him.
So that
She
would fit
played.
into Curtis because he
What'd you
was
say?
he was the teacher of oboe at Curtis for years.
Yeah.
What was he, Stokowski's oboist, Ormany's
Mhm.
earlier oboist? I mean, it's very famous, right?
Right. But I mean, just I would never have been exposed to his ideas,
Hmm.
except that her web of what her time of
Hmm.
growth was, and she played a lot of chamber music with Sasha Schneider, and just really cool people like that whose musical foundations seeped into all of her ideas about how to get things across musically. And another important mentor of mine at both Juilliard and Curtis was Otto Werner Mueller,
Oh, right. Yeah.
and so he was. We didn't really have we didn't have him for orchestra all the time,
He was the orchestra
but
conductor at both
he
schools.
was the orchestra conductor. Yep, and but we in both orchestras, I'd say at least half or more of the time we had guest conductors,
Mhm.
but he was faculty at the school, and so I spent a lot of time playing under him, um and so
He was
his
tough, right? I mean, he was really.
yes, yeah, and I mean, I shouldn't laugh because I watched some destruction at his hands, and I
Mm.
there's definitely a lot of things about his style I would never want to emulate. I don't want to ever like terrify a horn player or anything like that, um
Like you
but
said, every coin has two sides, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. But I'm really grateful to him for sort of imparting this idea that that phrasing and interpretation can be so clear and so and simple, and that I spent a lot of time in his conductor's orchestra,
Mm.
which was essentially the master class or private lessons for the conductors at
Mm.
Curtis, um, and watched him train those conductors a lot, and so that gave me a really like a lot of strong ideas about score marking and preparation and
Expectations, I guess.
yeah, yeah, definitely, and just I guess to keep coming back to like how you can make something so that can feel so vague as musicality and phrasing so
Mm.
black and white for like a room full of people.
Logical.
Yeah, I mean, there's aspects of it that can just be
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
That's I guess
Yeah,
a
a
big
lot
thing.
of this is common sense, but there's not that's not real common, when you
Well, the way we experience it doesn't always feel like that, I think.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we, so much of learning and playing music is wrapped up in how we feel about it and how it and how we and what we go through while we're emotionally connecting with it. Do you know
He
what I mean?
he thought very Germanically, I guess, right?
Yes.
Like an engineer in a way, right? These
Right.
pieces are engineered like some of the German music's like a BMW. I mean, it's really well engineered, and
Right. And so if you're like one bolt in that BMW, it's really useful so much of the time if the rest of the machine also like knows it's a machine and like
mhm.
is following all of the same path instead of like all of the little boats in BMW having their own emotions about how the car is supposed to
Yeah,
run.
so unify the thing so that all the pieces fit together
Yeah.
and it works.
And
I
I
think
don't mean to
that's
downplay like the emotional and powerful personal side of music. It's just more about like how an orchestra can like work towards a single goal and be clear can be sometimes freeing instead of
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the
pressing.
person driving the BMW and the way it's handled and the way where it's going is one thing, but then the thing has to work well,
Yep.
I guess, right? It drives and handles really well, and so that's how it's put together, and I guess that's like an orchestra in a way, right? And so
Yeah.
when you're in an orchestra, what are the kind of things that make that work for you? Like as one of the people in it, some of the things that are really gratifying and some of the things that are really annoying. I mean, things that are, the bolts that are loose and pieces that don't fit together. And then there's things that just really go well.
Yeah, so things that are gratifying, I like I said, I don't want to downplay the intense emotional side of music. And to me, when you're in an orchestra, if you're playing with a conductor that has a really strong vision of where they want the music to go, like they're really clear in their mind about how they want something shaped, and they're not using the orchestra as a guinea pig type situation or trying to find their way.
Mm.
If that person is really convinced and bringing a strong and passionate vision of what the music's going to sound like when we start, I think those are the strongest experiences usually.
They say a horse knows if the person's afraid of it who's driving it, right?
Yeah.
Or what's going on with the rider, right? Or if they're just really um, sort of confident, and
Mm.
that's is a connection there. And what
Yeah,
about
not just confident, but really like directed in a and
knows where they're going with it? Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I
and,
guess.
and passionate about it, and really interested in hearing those sounds, you know, created and blended together.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the horse can feel better or not, I guess, be part of this ride, and but I mean, like, as part of it, what's the best part of playing in an orchestra and the most challenging for you?
Gosh, I miss it. I mean, I guess we play we played a Strauss program last year in an orchestra, and my stand partner's a good friend, and we walked off the stage after playing. um, Heldenleben, I think, and she just looked at me and was like, it's really cool that there's a whole room full of people who can do that.
Mm.
And I think that, in this time when so much is automated and so much is so many things are technology, um, an orchestra preparing a work and performing a work is not, it doesn't feel anything like that. It feels like it can't happen unless all of those people are there and of the same mind and giving of their time and their spirit to make this thing, this special in-person experience happen, right? And so I feel like in addition of it being something that we give to the audience, it's something that we all give to each other, and and I don't necessarily think about it in those words a lot of times, but anytime you're sitting on the stage and you hear one of your colleagues play a solo and you hear a, a little bit of their personality come out in it, I think you feel a little bit of that, and you feel like this deep connection to them that can't be had in words, and you know that they're putting themselves in this incredibly vulnerable place, um, and really preparing for it and bringing a whole lot of preparation, professionalism, and ability to
Yeah.
just that 1 second that you're experiencing. And I think, I may not go through that whole like diatribe in my mind when I'm
Right, right. But
on
you
the
kind of
stage,
get it.
but that little feeling that happens when that's taking place, and just like this, when you're playing a big tutti thing and you hear the sound of the entire orchestra playing, it's um you just have to have a little gratitude for how many people have to be invested to make it happen.
Hmm. And
That
you're
might have been
sitting in
a
the
longer
middle,
answer
and
than you were looking for.
you're sitting right in the middle of that sound. The audience never gets that close to the sound, and or coming right at you as the conductor, you can hear more equally
Yeah, and
what's
like,
coming at you, and it's really quite overwhelming sometimes. And then soloists, like you're saying, it can be so. We both teach, and we both are bringing this sort of lifestyle to students, and so it's kind of like interesting to show them how to show appreciation, like the normal way that maybe audience members don't know in rehearsal. If a soloist plays really well, then the orchestra shuffles their feet on the floor,
mhm,
this sort of, or pounds them on the floor, and that's something we learned as students. I remember that in Philadelphia. The students
mhm.
would sit upstairs in the Academy of Music on the fourth balcony, and you'd have the people with the expensive tickets kind of leaving to get home early before the crowds, and the people upstairs, it was a really great soloists, were pounding, and the floor was metal. You remember, right? It was boom, and it was
That
this
place
sort
is
of,
so weird.
yeah, yeah, and it was, and sometimes they would look up, like, I guess it was better than we thought it was. They didn't hear it, but the same in an orchestra rehearsal with this just subtle shuffling that can happen. Like
Mhm.
it's nice to see this sort of support for each other.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of like bringing that back to students, I think it's a very similar thing, and sometimes can be even more special, um, bringing that to students than even experiencing it on the professional level, because for a lot of them, um, it's the first time they've experienced it in the way, in that way. Or I mean, I guess it's always the first time you're gonna experience it in exactly that way, um, but when you work with an orchestra of students and you try everything you can think of to empower them to success in the performance of that piece or that program, or that concept, or that, um, you know technique, or whatever it is, um, and you watch them experience it, and like that moment where they connect to each other and they connect to the music, and you can step back and let it all kind
Mm.
of, um,
The light
you know,
bulbs go off and they get it. Yeah.
fill in and sort of run in its own energy. That's that's the same magic for me.
With students, it's like an extra shot of adrenaline besides, it's just on a heightened level. It may not be technically as perfect, but this sort of commitment is quite extraordinary once it's tapped.
Right, and like you said, the technical part is not always the biggest part of the experience when that comes
Hmm.
together. I mean, you need to certainly have enough command to to have it be clear and to be able to to let it open up like that and blossom. But I think because for a lot of them it's the first time, or they're so new in it, students can almost have that connection and emotional reaction at a larger scale than professionals,
Yeah.
and so it
But
can be
it's,
really
it's someone so musically advanced as you to be talking about stepping back, which is so unusual in a way. It's like to get students to the point, or anyone to the point where, as the leader, you just take your hands off,
I
you
think as a
know?
conductor for me, and as a teacher, that's kind of the idea. Like that's the point that you're working towards,
Yeah.
where you can step back and um, you're not fighting the medium. You're not trying to prevent disaster, but you're just I can imagine you and I both work with ceramics. We both throw
Yeah,
pottery at the wheel, right?
that's
So
right.
like if you remember back to the beginning when you couldn't even center the clay on the wheel, it's like you were fighting it all the time. But then
Right.
you watch a professional potter and somebody who's like a lifetime potter, and it's like they barely have to touch the clay to get it
Mm.
to do what they want, and their vision from the beginning
It's
is
clear.
guiding their very first motions, and they only need to put into it what the clay needs. They don't need to go through this whole you know there's
The
not some scary
centering. Yeah.
way. They look so calm, and they look like they were they make it look like it's easy, and I think that's related to stepping back.
There's so much about pottery that's related to conducting, I find. you know,
Yeah.
is the whole knowing what you want to do with the clay, and not fighting it. Yeah, it's right. And yet there's a certain intention that, because the clay can decide if it's off center and you leave it that way, it's not going to ever be right. When you're finished, it's always going to be off. And the sort of just sort of carving it out your hands sort of gently, but not much. If you do too much, you'll throw the whole thing off. It's very, very much like conducting. Too much
Yeah,
is.
I mean, you're standing on the podium and you feel like the delicate rhythmic balance between people who can like sometimes hear each other and sometimes not. And
Hmm.
sometimes the more you do, the more likely you are to knock it off center. And sometimes, it's that it's like, kind of like surfing on
When they
the
need you, when they need you, and when they don't need you.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's the thing. And I was just watching the famous Carlos Kleiber with an Alexander teacher
Oh
last
wow.
month, right? So the Alexander teacher looking at Carlos Kleiber, a musician, and never saw him before, right? And so he's just staring at it, couldn't get enough, and said, he knows just when not to conduct. He knows when they don't need him.
Wow.
What an interesting response,
Yeah.
he knows when they don't need him, so he lets go of the wheel. It's like, it's good. It's just, it's beautiful when that happens, because it's such amount of trust in the players. They're going to be fine,
Hmm.
and so yeah, but tell us before we end. We could go on forever about music. We just
We
love talking
could.
about it. But
I
but
love
there's this
talking
other
about it.
aspect to you that's very different from someone who went through such high level training on your instruments, and then you're committed to fiddling.
Hmm.
So where did that come from?
I think I always wanted to fiddle. I do. I don't know where I heard it, but somehow I had a sound in my ear that I wanted to go after. And and the sound I found in that search turned out to be the sounds of the southern mountains and beyond. And so I started when I think my first experience was in 1998 when I went to Ashokan Music and Dance
Mm,
in Olive Bridge, New York, in the Hudson Valley, or in the Catskills,
yeah.
and that's pretty close to where I grew up, and I had this amazing immersion experience, and I have to say my transition of trying to learn another language on the same instrument was a battle. It was hard
Mm,
for me, and after I started learning fiddle tunes, and I never like stopped in that time, but it was probably 6 years before I felt um, enabled to play music with other people.
fiddle.
And yeah, and
Yeah.
it just took me that long to. I did the language of Western European classical music is as it's a it was my culture, and I had to learn to like step away from that culture in order to embrace a new one.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and I mean, not I mean, I still obviously am very committed to performing and studying classical music, but so it not come away in that way, but to be able to speak another language without the accent of my home language is something that was I had to work really hard at it, and
Interesting.
it's something that's really provided a lot of richness for my life. I do work as a in the field of traditional music a little bit, but mostly it's a social experience
Mm,
for me. I do a lot of teaching, I guess, of fiddle um, and old time mountain music, um, but it's an incredible social community that's opened up for me and provided a network of support. Is what led me down to the southeast to live,
you
and
went to Boone, right?
I went to Boone to do my master's studies, and I did a degree in Appalachian studies.
That's great. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
it's just so fascinating that you were able to add it instead of, this idea of canceling these days. Classical music is dead white guy music. And it's, why don't we just include more into it? I'm wondering.
yeah, that's a very complicated question. I
It's
think
very
that
complicated. We don't have time today, but the idea that you just included this into your musical
in
work,
my own life, I
you
think it
know?
also raised a lot of ideas of like in teaching for me about um, like trying not to make that one language, trying not to assume it as universal.
The only language.
Yeah, and to when you, as you say, including other music, not just including music from the perspective of my classical training,
Hmm.
but to try to recognize all of the different languages that are spoken
Yeah,
in music, and to empower those languages in addition to the actual sounds themselves.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great place to end. It's so nice to talk to you again. And
You too, David.
yeah, so thank you again. And see you when the pandemic's over in real life.
Yeah, I look forward to it, David.
Me too. Bye
Bye.
bye.